Look at this cube. This is a nice cube.
I like the cube.
This cube was made by Asustor and it has a name. This is the Locker Store 4 Gen 2, the long-awaited sequel to the Locker Store 4 Gen 1. Now let me tell you why this is one of my favorite cubes, even more so than the ones I put in my drink, the ones that make it cold. Oh, Rubik's Cubes. Unlike a Rubik's Cube, this one can fit 4 3.5 or 2.5 inch hard drives or SSDs, and even has compatibility for 4 M.2 SSDs. And the coolest part is that when you turn it on, it does a lot of cool stuff like storing files, playing media, acting as a VPN server, and a whole bunch of other nerdy things. I don't think I've mentioned this yet, but this is an NAS, just so we're clear. Let's take a deep dive into this guy to see if it's something that can earn a spot in your home lab. Okay, let's read off the specs on this guy. Like I mentioned, it has 4 hard drive bays that can accommodate either a 3.5 or 2.5 inch SATA drive, which is usually enough for a home lab or small office. The bays are easily accessible by pressing a button on the front, which releases the latch and allows you to slide the sled out and back in. I'm running 4 6TB Seagate Iron Wolf NAS drives, which are among the best drives you can get for this kind of setup. Now we aren't done with storage just yet. I did say that this cube can handle 4 M.2 drives as well, and I wouldn't lie to you guys. Removing the outer case will reveal the... Not again. This video is sponsored by Exter in their line of high quality RFID blocking slim wallets and accessories. I'm gonna be honest with you guys, I've used the same Amazon wallet for the past couple of years, and while it's fine, these are on a completely different level. These wallets from Exter are extremely high quality, and while I'm still a broke boy, at least I can look cool now. Their lineup includes a few different options from leather, aluminum, and carbon fiber. My personal favorite though is the Senate in steel blue. It's slim, wrapped in leather, and like all of the other options, has this really cool card ejection mechanism that not only lets you retrieve your cards faster, but is 100% gonna be my new work fidget device. Check out Exter's line of wallets along with their solar-powered Bluetooth tracking card and other accessories by heading over to shop.exter.com/RaidOwl and use discount code RaidOwl for up to 35% off your next order. Removing the outer case reveals the 4 M.2 slots that are connected to the system via a PCIe slot. These drives can be used in their own RAID configuration or used as SSD caching to speed up your hard disk pool. That's currently how I'm using it, and I am running 2 of these Seagate Iron Wolf NAS NVMe drives, and they're pretty awesome. I do have 2 of them in there, meaning that I'm getting a total of 1 terabyte of SSD caching because they are set up mirrored, because they are write caches, and you don't want to run into a scenario where you're writing data, it's stored in the cache, and then you lose power or something and all that data gets wiped out. So yeah, really cool stuff. Everything I talk about today will be listed down in the description below if you want to check it out or cosplay as me and my cube. So what's powering all of this? Well, I'm glad you asked, scriptwriter Brett. In here we have a quad-core Intel Celeron N5105 and 4 gigabytes of DDR4 RAM, which is expandable to 16 gigs. In terms of I/O, we get dual 2.5 gig networking ports, dual USB 3.2 Gen 2x1, and an HDMI port. More on that later. All of this comes in at a price of $610 US. This isn't cheap by any means, but for what you get with the 4 hard drive bays, 4 NVMe slots, and dual 2.5 gig networking, I think that's a fair price. Oh, and you can upgrade it to 10 gig networking with an add-in card, but you will have to remove the NVMe card, which means you lose access to all 4 NVMe slots. Personally, I'd rather have the NVMe slots, but if you want to go fast over your network, then you have that option. Now, specs and hardware don't mean beans if the software is absolute butt cheeks. So let's go on an adventure, shall we? This cube runs Asustor's ADM, which looks like most NAS UIs, which means you get an old Android tablet looking interface. When I first booted up the device, I was conveniently shown the IP that my cube was assigned on the little screen on the front. Navigating to that IP in my browser let me access the UI. I was very surprised at how quick the initial setup was. All I did was basically name my device and set a few settings. One thing that was kind of strange is that the pool was already configured for me in a RAID 5 configuration. Now that's the configuration I was going to pick anyway, but I was just surprised that they assumed what I wanted. If you don't want that config, then you can easily rebuild the pool in whatever config you want, so it's really not that big of a deal. All right, so we got our pool set up with roughly 16 terabytes of usable space. I did have to go in and add my NVMe cache drives manually, as those didn't get added to the pool automatically. All right, now remember, this is a NAS, so we are going to want to share all of that juicy storage over the network. Now, I assumed that there would be a sharing setting or app to do this, but my smooth brain took a few minutes to discover that this setting is in the Access Control app. In here, we have the ability to create dedicated share folders and assign permissions to specific users or groups. These will be created as SMB shares by default and can be accessed by any Windows, Linux, or Mac system by navigating to the server IP or DNS, followed by the name of the share folder. Then you can enter the username and password of an account with appropriate permissions. And just like that, you can access your storage from anywhere in your network. And you can even browse the files using the built-in File Explorer app, which can be quite useful. At this point, you can call it a day. At the bare minimum, you have a crap ton of space to store all of your home movies. And you know what they say about bare minimum? They say if you do the bare minimum, then that's fine. However, this is the Raid Owl YouTube channel. We don't settle for bare minimums sometimes. So let's dive into the rest of the cool shit that this cube can do. All right, you've got your home movies stored on here, and they're super important, so you want to make sure they're backed up and secure. One easy way is to start with snapshots. I wouldn't really consider snapshots a true backup as they are stored on the same disk pool as the actual data, but a snapshot will help you in the event that you delete or move some files that you shouldn't. Simply revert to a previous snapshot and you're good to go. Snapshots are simple to set up in here by going to the Snapshot Center and scheduling a snapshot on whichever pool you'd like. You can set these as frequently as you'd like, but for me, once a day is plenty, and in some cases, I'll only run them weekly. If you want to do a proper backup, meaning that your data is safely tucked away on another data pool, then we'll want to head into the Backup and Restore app. From here, you're given plenty of options to back up your data, from rsync, FTP, to an internal pool, to an external drive, then something called One Touch Backup, which is pretty sweet. You see, there is a USB port on the front here that also doubles as a button. You can configure this to backup or sync with a USB connected drive when that button is pressed. I can see this being a huge benefit to creators who are out filming or shooting photos, then come back, plug in their drive or SD card, and offload all of their footage with a touch of a single button. And like I said, there are plenty of other ways to back up your data on here. One that I have a slight complaint about is the internal backup. Why, you ask? Well, Asus Store has this really cool feature in the Access Control app where you can mount an external SMB share, which is awesome, but you can't use it as a backup location. I've mounted my entire 60 terabyte TrueNAS pool on here and can access everything in the File Explorer, but if I wanted to use it for automated backups, then I just have to kick rocks. Sure, you can set up rsync, but this would be so much easier. Oh well, let's talk about one more way to keep your data safe. Asus Store has this app called EasySync, and yep, you guessed it, it's a way to sync data between two devices. You guys are so smart. To sync data, you'll download the EasySync app on whichever device you want to use. In my case, it's going to be my Windows machine. They have apps for all other platforms. If you're a basement-dwelling Windows hater, don't worry. In my instance, I've set it up to sync a folder located on my desktop to a folder that I created on my NAS. Once this is set up, the program will make sure that the folder on your device and the folder on your NAS are always in sync, which is an excellent feature to have. Okay, I am done talking about backups and all that other stuff. let's move on to something a bit more exciting. Settings. Yay. Yeah, it's not that exciting, but I do want to cover a few things before we move into some cooler stuff. Navigating to the Settings app will give you access to modify things like how you log into your Cube, changing the network interface settings, and applying VLAN tags, controlling some power features like how the LEDs work, how fast the fans spin, and some wake on LAN stuff. Furthermore, you can set up notifications to email or text you when certain events are triggered. You can set up certificates, and you can go about setting up Easy Connect, which is Asustor's way of easily allowing you to access your NAS from pretty much anywhere outside of your network. It's a fairly painless process. Just create an account and enable Easy Connect. Then you can use the URL it gives you to access your NAS from anywhere. You can essentially achieve the same thing by having your NAS act as a VPN server. More on that later. All right, let's talk about services, which is kind of like settings, I guess. Kinda. In here, you'll see all the background services your Cube can run, from SMB, which is enabled by default, FTP servers, rsync, reverse proxy, and all kinds of other stuff. If you haven't noticed, I'm skipping over a lot of stuff because it's pretty much impossible for me to cover every little thing with this device. So if there's something that you want more info on, let me know down in the comments and we'll see if Asustor wants to write me a fat check to make a video on it. I'm joking. I'm not joking. Now that we've seen all the traditional NAS stuff, let's dive into the App Store and see what kind of cool stuff we can run. First one is going to be Asustor Portal, which essentially transforms your Cube into a media consumption device. Remember how I said that there was an HDMI port on here? Well, this is what it's for. Plug your Cube into a TV, connect the keyboard and mouse, download the Asustor Portal app, and just like that, you have access to all kinds of goodies like YouTube, Netflix, Firefox web browser, and even VirtualBox. More on that in a bit. Obviously, this feature is only going to be useful if you have your NAS set up in your living room or something, which isn't going to be me, but could be you. I don't know your life. Overall, this works well. I mean, the device itself isn't very loud at all, so I don't really think you'd mind having this thing set up in your media center. The next feature is one of the most useful features that this Cube ships with, and that is its ability to run Docker containers. Pretty much any home service out there can be spun up in Docker, which means this thing can host plenty of services. Honestly, a lot of the apps you see in the App Store are going to run in Docker anyway, so you may as well just install it. Now, you're free to use Docker by SSHing in and navigating the command line, but I'm a huge fan of Portainer to manage my Docker instance. Luckily, you can just spin up Portainer by downloading the app. Now that we have Portainer, we can use it as we would on any other machine. Head into the web UI and navigate your Docker setup to your heart's content. And if you don't see an app in the Asustor App Store, then chances are you can just install it yourself with Docker. Let's take a look at one of my favorite services, File Browser. It's not listed in the App Store, so we're going to use Docker Compose to get it installed. I've copied my Docker Compose YAML from my other machine, and I'll use that over here. The only things we'll need to modify are the binding mount locations. You can see we have a data and a config directory. So what we're going to do is go into the File Explorer and create those subdirectories within the Docker folder. After doing this, we can use the mount path to tell our Docker container where on our host we want to point to for each of those locations. And that's really it. Simply deploy the stack, and once it's running, we can navigate to the File Browser web-hosted UI and party. You'll notice that any changes I make in the File Browser app will be reflected in the mount path that we specified, so we know that it's working as expected. Cool. Isn't Docker the best? Now, what if you want to get fancier and spin up some actual virtual machines on here? Well, you can kind of do that with the VirtualBox app. I say kind of because it really wasn't a usable experience for me. I attempted to install Ubuntu Desktop just to test out a somewhat lightweight desktop OS, and it was honestly awful. It took about an hour to install, and then the performance was just miserable. This could be due to the quad-core Celeron CPU or the 4 GB of RAM. Either way, I wouldn't really count on this device to host virtual machines, and if you really want an Ubuntu server instance, then just spin one up in Docker. It'll be much easier and much less of a headache, I promise. I may try to upgrade the RAM to 16 gigabytes in the future to see if my experience is any better, but as of now, this isn't really a feature that I'll be using. The next app I want to cover is an Asustor branded one called Dr. Asustor. Cheesy name, but a pretty cool app. Open it up and it'll run a little diagnostics test on your cube and give you a report letting you know what vulnerabilities it finds. When I ran mine, you could see a few, some of which aren't a big deal, but one that I figured I should fix was the auto direct to HTTPS. It even gave me a link to the settings menu where I could easily make that change. Once I checked that one checkbox, then all of my HTTP requests to my NAS were now automatically redirected to HTTPS, meaning that we get proper encryption. I really like that it gives you some useful information, but it isn't annoying about it. It's like, hey man, here's some things that could make your NAS better. You can fix them or you could not fix them. We don't really give a shit. I've seen plenty of other softwares that'll spam you with notifications or pop-ups that are so annoying that you end up just turning the whole service off. Now we are going to take a look at the app that I think is most beneficial to anyone who already doesn't have a password manager, and that is Vault Warden. Vault Warden is a self-hosted password manager that'll let you store all your passwords on your own device, fully encrypted. You can access your passwords via a browser plugin or through a mobile app, which makes it extremely convenient. I personally use this myself and strongly recommend you to take a look if you don't already have a safe way to store your passwords. I mentioned before that you could use EasyConnect to access your NAS anywhere in the world, or that you could use the NAS as a VPN server. Well, let's do that. Conveniently, the app is just called VPN Server, and once you open it up, you will see that you have three options to choose from: OpenVPN, PPTP, and IPsec. I went with OpenVPN because that's what I'm used to. All you have to do is enable it in the settings, then configure a few things like the DHCP range you want to use. Then you can apply that and download the OpenVPN client profile that can be used on whatever device you want to connect back to your home network with. I think most people should have some way of accessing their data from outside their network, and a VPN is one of the safest ways to do it. You can also use the Tailscale app, which is great and something that I previously used. If you want to check that video out, link up here. So you have all this storage space, you have all your home movies and weird TV shows saved on here. Surely you'll want to run Plex to host it all, right? No? Too bad, we are going to talk about it anyway. Plex is available for download in the App Store, and you'll notice that right after you install it, that a Plex folder is automatically created for you. I went ahead and created a subdirectory for all the media I'll be hosting. You can keep it wherever you want, but I thought that would be a nice place to host it. Opening the Plex app will guide you through a first-time setup where you'll log in, give your server a name, and specify your media library locations. There really isn't that much to it. This video isn't really about setting up a Plex server, so I'm not going to dive into all that. There's no shortage of videos on Plex on YouTube if you're interested in learning more. Just know that the device performs really well and has no trouble playing back even H.265 content. Now the Celeron CPU in here isn't the most powerful, so I wouldn't try to do transcoding playback for more than a few streams at a time, but for most users, that's plenty enough. Speaking of transcoding, a nifty little app called Handbrake is available to download. Handbrake is a media transcoding service that will allow you to take videos and convert them to a different format that may be more suitable for streaming over the internet. Another use case is creating proxies for all you content creators out there. You can set Handbrake to automatically monitor a folder, and when any file is placed there, it'll transcode it down to whatever preset you have specified. Again, really cool, probably a niche case for most users, but at least you know it's available. All right, let's talk about one last app before we wrap up here. This one is pretty interesting. It's another Asustor branded app called Asustor Live. Essentially what it is an app that will allow you to live stream to multiple streaming platforms at the same time while also recording your stream locally. I mean, I can see the appeal here. It's fairly easy to set up. You just specify which stream sites you want to use, enter your stream key, then point your streaming software to the NAS. Now, do I plan on using it? No. I don't really stream to multiple sites, and I don't record my live streams. Does that mean that it's not a useful app? No. Just because it's not for me doesn't mean it's not useful. I can definitely see this being useful for IRL streamers who want to keep a local, high quality recording of their streams. Maybe this is something that you'd actually use, and if it is, cool. Some honorable mention apps that I want to point out but don't really have enough time to cover are the Surveillance Station for local security camera monitoring, Nextcloud, Git, and your entire RStack. So overall, what do I think about the Asustor Locker Store 4 Gen 2? I think it's a really good product. For $600, you get 4 drive bays, 4 NVMe slots, dual 2.5 gig networking, and a convenient form factor that can also be used as a media player. Yes, I know $600 is a lot of money, but compared to other options out there, you'd be hard-pressed to find a product with these hardware specs that's also packed with a quality software. Is it perfect? No. If you want to upgrade to 10 gig, you lose access to all of your NVMe slots. Also, the App Store seems to be a mess between dedicated apps, Docker containers, background services, and even add-ons, so this can be confusing. And the main complaint that I mentioned earlier is that you can't natively back up your data to a CIFS mounted directory. But again, for the price, I do think this is a solid device. Links to everything are located down in the description. Let me know what you think of this cube and what you're using as a NAS in your home lab. Well, that's all I have for you today. If you liked it, then drop a like below. If you like content, then please consider subscribing. I want to give a huge shout out to my YouTube members and my Patreons. You guys are the cubiest cubes out there, and even more cubey than a Rubik's Cube. That's it. If you're still here, thank you so much for watching, and I will see you in the next one.